It was a cold morning, the kind that reminded me of how small my life had become. I sat at the kitchen table, trying to hide the ache in my bones, in my heart. The air in the house felt stale as the clock ticked away, marking another moment of silence that stretched between me and my son. Adam had told me it was time to leave. He didn't say it like that, no, of course not. His words were wrapped in an uncomfortable politeness, the kind of words you say when you know the truth is too harsh to face. But the truth was clear. My son and his wife had decided they were done with me. The little house I had spent my life in with my husband was no longer my home. My favorite rocking chair sat by the window, the one I rocked our children in. And now, just like that, they were taking it from me. I could see the edges of it, the decisions made behind closed doors, and their cool, calculated smiles when they told me that it was time for me to move to a better place. "Mom," Adam had said earlier, voice almost shaking with discomfort, "it's just, we can't do this anymore. Things have changed. You've gotten older, and we can't keep up with everything." His face was pale, a strange guilt in his eyes as he looked at me. His wife, Natalie, stood behind him, arms crossed, her gaze cold. "I just don't see how this is fair, Adam," I had replied, but my voice was weak. I knew the words weren't enough to change his mind. This house, my life, it's all I've ever known. But the decision had already been made. The bags were packed, my few belongings stuffed hastily into a suitcase, the familiar comforts of home replaced by the cold, sterile notion of a place where old people like me were supposed to go. I had thought they loved me, that they saw me as a mother, as their family, but they didn't. Not anymore. When I looked at them, I saw strangers. Adam, my own son, had no real place for me in his life anymore. And Natalie. She didn't even try to hide her indifference. She thought I was a burden, a weight on her dreams. She was always so obsessed with their future, her version of the good life. And I was nothing but an obstacle. "Let's get going," Adam had said softly, turning away from me. "It's for the best, Mom." They had driven me to the run-down motel without so much as a glance back. I had sat there in the passenger seat, staring out the window, watching the world I'd known for so many years slip away from me. My house, my memories, all of it fading into the rearview mirror. We pulled into the parking lot of the Starlight Motel, the sign flickering weakly in the dimming light. "Here we are," Adam said, voice stiff. I tried not to look at the sadness that seeped into the lines of his face. I didn't want to feel the sting of betrayal, but it was there, sharp as a knife. This wasn't just abandonment, it was rejection. I was no longer the woman who had raised him, the mother who had cared for him, the one who had been there through thick and thin. I was now just a problem to be solved. The room was everything I had feared it would be. Damp, lifeless, with peeling walls and a smell that made my stomach churn. The bed sagged in the middle, the small, buzzing television in the corner mocking the emptiness of the space. The walls didn't speak of history or warmth, just loneliness. I watched as Adam took my suitcase and placed it by the door. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't give me a hug or a kiss. He just turned and walked out. I could hear the car starting in the distance, and then it was gone. My son, my family, leaving me behind. The silence in the room was deafening. I stood in the doorway for what felt like an eternity, my heart breaking in ways I didn't think possible. I looked down at the small amount of money they had left for me, a measly $347. It was more than enough for them to think they'd done their duty, but in that moment, it felt like nothing. $100 bill, a few 20s, and a couple of ones. That was what they thought I was worth. Sitting on the edge of the bed, I stared at the walls, my fingers trembling. They thought they had broken me. But deep down I knew they hadn't. They had given me the space to rebuild myself. I wasn't finished yet. I had always been more than they realized. I had lived my life quietly, humbly, but I had strength, and they didn't know how strong I really was. It would take time, but I would rise again. And this time I would fight for myself. I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. I took a deep breath and looked at the phone in my hand. It wasn't much, but it was all I had. I began to scroll through the contacts, searching for a name I hadn't spoken to in years, but one I knew would understand me. the one person who could help me navigate what came next. Tomorrow would be a new day, and I would start it with a plan. I had never imagined that in the quiet of my abandoned motel room, surrounded by old memories and the sting of betrayal, I would find something that would change my life. It felt like an eternity had passed since Adam and Natalie left me here, a place where even the silence seemed to mock my existence. But I had a mind that still worked, a mind that hadn't aged or dulled with the years. And as I sat there, alone with nothing but my thoughts and the hum of the overhead light, a flicker of recognition stirred deep within me. I had forgotten about the box of documents. It had been tucked away in the attic for years, full of old papers, receipts, and deeds to lands that Martin and I had bought over the years. At the time, I hadn't given them much thought. Martin had always been a collector of things, a quiet man with big dreams and a vision for the future. He loved the land, the maps, and the way the Ozarks felt under his feet. But at the time I thought little of it. These were just pieces of paper, old parcels of land that seemed insignificant. But as I sat in that dreary room, something changed. The humiliation of being left here by my own son, the ache in my heart, the overwhelming sense of being discarded, it all sparked a fire within me. I could still hear Martin's voice, calm and steady, telling me that there was more to life than just getting by. His dreams had always been bigger than mine, and I had followed him, trusting in his quiet wisdom. Now, I understood what he had been trying to do. I opened the box that had sat untouched for so long. The faint smell of old paper filled the air as I lifted the brittle deeds and faded maps. As my fingers ran over the edges of the documents, my eyes fell upon the old geological maps Martin had cherished. He used to spend hours poring over them, tracing lines, studying the contours of the land. His finger often landing on certain spots as he muttered under his breath. I never fully understood why he was so obsessed with those maps. They had always seemed like a hobby, something to keep him occupied during the long winters when the garden had gone to rest. But now, as I examined the maps, something clicked in my mind. These weren't just maps. These weren't just scribbles of a man obsessed with rocks. These were the very plots of land that had been purchased, bit by bit, over the years. And now, with the rise of new technologies, these lands were suddenly valuable. More valuable than I could have ever imagined. I traced my finger over one of the plots, a small cluster of parcels in the heart of the Ozarks. My eyes widened as I saw the markings that I had never paid attention to before, symbols that, at the time, meant nothing to me. But they meant everything now. These lands sat on top of a massive deposit of minerals. Rare minerals, valuable minerals. The kind that were crucial for technological industries, the kind that could bring in millions, perhaps even billions of dollars. I couldn't breathe for a moment, my heart racing. Martin had known. He had known all along. What he had seen as a small investment, a passion for geology, had turned into the very treasure I had been searching for, just not in the way I had expected. I felt a rush of power surge through me. This wasn't just land. This was my key to freedom. This was my ticket to reclaim my dignity, my strength. I had been left with nothing, but now I saw that I had everything I needed to rebuild my life, on my terms. I pulled out my phone, my hands trembling with excitement as I searched for the number of a geologist. I found it, a contact I had stored away in case Martin's maps ever turned out to be something more than just memories. I dialed the number, and after a few rings, a calm voice answered. "Hello, this is Dr. Ross," the voice said. "How can I help you?" I swallowed, trying to steady myself. "Dr. Ross, my name is Evelyn Marshall. I have a piece of land I need to have evaluated. It was purchased years ago by my late husband. I believe it may have some significant mineral value. Can you help me?" There was a brief pause before he spoke again. "I'm happy to help, Mrs. Marshall. Tell me about the land." I explained the details, the parcels that had once seemed like nothing more than old investments. As I spoke, I could feel my heart racing. The excitement, the hope, it was all bubbling to the surface. I wasn't just a forgotten woman. I wasn't just a burden to my family. I was Evelyn Marshall, the owner of something invaluable. The conversation lasted longer than I expected, And by the end of it, Dr. Ross promised to send a team to evaluate the land. He mentioned the advanced technologies they would use to assess the mineral deposits: radar, satellite imaging, and ground surveys. His words were full of optimism, but it was clear to me now. What Martin had seen in those rocks wasn't just passion. It was vision. And now that vision was mine to take. I hung up the phone and sat back in the chair, the weight of it all settling in. This wasn't just about wealth. This was about power. This was about a woman who had been discarded, left to fade away in the shadows, only to discover that she held within her the very thing that could rewrite her future. As I stood up from the chair, I walked to the small window of the motel room and looked out into the dark night. The world outside seemed cold, distant, and so far removed from the life I once knew. But now, I understood that I was no longer a passenger in my own story. I was the author. Tomorrow I would leave this place. But I would leave it with a plan. And the world would see who Evelyn Marshall truly was. The morning light seeped through the thin curtains of my motel room, casting long shadows on the walls. I had barely slept, but I could feel the weight of the night lifting as a new resolve settled into my bones. I couldn't stay here any longer. The motel room, stale, damp, and suffocating, had become a symbol of everything that had been stripped from me. I wasn't going to let it define me. No more staring out the window, waiting for someone else to change my fate. I had to act. With a steady breath, I rose from the bed. My legs were stiff, my body sore, but I didn't care. This was the moment I would stop being the passive observer of my life. This was when I would start taking charge. I wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. I packed my things into the small suitcase, feeling the weight of every item, the last remnants of my life before it had been turned upside down. I walked out of the room, shutting the door behind me with finality. I didn't look back. There was no reason to. The air outside was crisp, and I could smell the faint scent of pine and earth, a sharp contrast to the stale room I had just left. I walked to the nearest phone booth, my heart pounding as I reached for the receiver. I had no idea what I was going to find, but I was determined to find it. I needed answers, and I wouldn't stop until I got them. The phone book in my hands felt heavy, but it wasn't a burden. It was a key. I flipped through the pages, scanning for names, geologists, land evaluators, anyone who could help me understand what I had discovered. I was no longer a fragile old woman abandoned by her family. I was Evelyn Marshall, and I was going to take my future into my hands. I dialed the first number that caught my eye. "Hello." A voice answered on the other end, sharp and alert. "This is Mike Carter." I cleared my throat, steadying my nerves. "Hello, Mr. Carter. My name is Evelyn Marshall, and I'm looking for help to evaluate some land that I inherited. My husband left me several parcels, and I believe there may be something valuable there. Can you help me?" There was a brief pause on the other end, a soft shuffle of papers. "That's an interesting situation, Mrs. Marshall. I'd be happy to assist you. Tell me a little more about the land." As I explained the parcels Martin had bought over the years, the excitement in his voice grew. He asked questions about the location, the maps, and the type of land. I felt a flicker of something new. A spark of hope. Mike wasn't just interested in the land. He was intrigued. This wasn't just about evaluating property. It was about possibilities. "We can meet tomorrow," Mike said after a few more questions. "I'll bring my equipment and we'll take a look. I think you're onto something here." I hung up the phone feeling a wave of relief wash over me. Tomorrow I would meet Mike. Tomorrow I would step into a new world. A world where I wasn't powerless, where I wasn't invisible. I had a purpose now, a plan. I had nothing left to lose, but everything to gain. As I walked back to the motel, my steps were lighter. I could already feel the pieces starting to fall into place. This wasn't just a consultation. It was my first step towards reclaiming what was mine. It was the beginning of something much bigger than I had ever imagined. Later that evening, I sat in the small hotel room, carefully going over the maps and documents once more. The weight of the decision to contact Mike felt less like a burden and more like a triumph. I wasn't waiting for anyone anymore. I was doing this on my own. My phone buzzed with a text message from my son, Adam. I stared at the screen for a moment, the familiar name flashing in front of me. "Hope you're doing okay," it read. I felt a pang of something. Maybe it was nostalgia or maybe regret, but I didn't respond. I wasn't sure if I ever would. Tomorrow wasn't just another day. It was the day I would start building a future for myself. A future where I wasn't just a forgotten woman in a motel room. Tomorrow I would stand on solid ground once more. I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling the energy of this new resolve pulsing through me. I had been cast aside, yes, but that was their mistake. They thought they had left me with nothing, but I was about to show them just how much I had. I was ready. The world was waiting for me. The air inside the law office felt different, thicker, as if the weight of what was happening pressed down on me with every breath I took. It was a weight I had never felt before, and yet it didn't feel heavy in the way I had expected. No, this was the weight of something greater than I had ever imagined. This was the weight of control, the weight of change. I entered the office, my heart beating in a steady rhythm, and saw Mike waiting for me in the reception area. His face was serious, but there was a glimmer of respect in his eyes that I hadn't expected. I wasn't just some frail old woman stumbling into a new world. I was Evelyn Marshall, and I was about to step into something much larger than I had ever known. "This is a big step," Mike said as I walked toward him. His voice was low, almost reverent, as though he too understood what this moment meant. I nodded, though I didn't speak right away. I wasn't nervous. No, I had been through too much to be nervous now. This wasn't just a meeting. This was my chance to stand up. This was the first step in taking my life back. A door opened, and a man stepped into the waiting area. A man with silver hair and a face that spoke of years spent navigating the world of contracts and negotiations. He was the lawyer, Mr. Robertson. His eyes were steady, his demeanor calm, and his presence was somehow both reassuring and commanding. "Ms. Marshall," he said as he extended a hand to me. "It's a pleasure to meet you." I shook his hand firmly, my grip strong. "Thank you for helping me," I said, my voice steady. "Let's get to it." Without missing a beat, Robertson nodded and motioned for me to follow him into the small office where the documents were laid out before me. Each one of them was a promise, a new beginning. I could feel the significance of the moment settling over me like a cloak. He gestured to the papers on the desk. "These are the deeds for the parcels of land you inherited. They've been evaluated, and everything has been prepared. If you sign here, Ms. Marshall, you will officially become the sole owner of these properties." I looked at the documents. These were not just pieces of paper. These were my future. I was no longer a forgotten woman in a motel. I was a woman with power, with land. Land that was now worth more than anyone could have imagined. Mike stood quietly by the door, watching me with something akin to pride in his eyes. I could feel his gaze, and it bolstered me. This was real. This was mine. I reached out and picked up the pen. My hand didn't tremble. The paper felt sturdy beneath my fingers, and as I placed my signature on the first document, I could feel the weight of years of uncertainty lift from my shoulders. This was the first of many steps. The first of many victories. "Congratulations, Ms. Marshall," Robertson said after I signed the final document. His voice was smooth, confident. "Your land is now officially yours. This is a big move. Your future is now in your hands." I sat back in the chair, letting the words wash over me. My mind raced, but my heart was calm. Everything was changing, and it was happening because of me. This was the moment I had been waiting for. The moment when I took back my life. The moment when I took back my dignity. I stood up from the chair, feeling lighter than I had in days. Robertson handed me a copy of the documents. I took them with a steady hand, the weight of them now a symbol of something new. I wasn't just holding papers. I was holding the keys to my future. I thanked him quietly, and with that, I turned and left the office. Mike was waiting outside, his eyes meeting mine with that same respect, but now there was something else there. a shared understanding that we were both part of something bigger than either of us had expected. "Ready?" Mike asked, his voice filled with anticipation. I looked around, the city buzzing with life around me, and I felt the pulse of possibility in the air. I was ready. Ready to move forward, ready to make something of myself. I nodded, a small smile tugging at my lips. "Let's do this." As we walked out of the building, I felt the world shift beneath my feet. The weight that had pressed down on me for so long had been lifted, replaced by the promise of what was to come. This wasn't just about land or money. This was about reclaiming everything I had lost. My self-worth, my purpose, my place in this world. I knew I was walking toward something grand, something that would define the rest of my life. It wasn't just the land. It was the beginning of a legacy. A legacy that would be built on my terms, my strength, and my will. And as I stood there, with the city bustling around me and the land that was now mine stretching out before me, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. It was the kind of hope that comes not from the kindness of others, but from the strength of your own heart. This was just the beginning. The world had underestimated me, but now it would have to reckon with who Evelyn Marshall truly was. It was an ordinary evening, or at least it felt that way. I sat at my new kitchen table, sipping tea, my fingers wrapped around the warm ceramic cup. The apartment was modest, but it felt like my own at last. There was something satisfying in the simple act of living independently, in the small victories that made the world seem like it was shifting back into my favor. After everything I had been through, this feeling of control was something I had longed for without even realizing it. The reality of my situation finally settled in fully. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving. It had taken a great deal of pain to get here, but the woman I was now, the woman I had become, wasn't the frail old woman they had discarded. No, I had a future and I was going to make it mine. My thoughts wandered back to the land that had been my husband's passion and now, in the wake of his passing, had become my lifeline. When I first discovered the value of those parcels, I had felt like I was standing on the edge of something monumental. But now, as I sat in the quiet of my new home, it was clear that the next step wasn't just about wealth. It was about reclaiming my dignity, about showing my family, Adam and Natalie, that I was no longer the woman they could discard. I wasn't going to do this in a rush. No, the best form of revenge was the kind that built slowly, carefully, methodically. It wasn't about a loud confrontation or a dramatic gesture. It was about showing them in the most subtle way that I was still here, and I was stronger than they could ever imagine. It was time for the first step. I wasn't going to make the first move by confronting them directly. No. The first move would be far more strategic. It was time to remind them of me, to show them that I was still part of their world, but not in the way they expected. They thought I was powerless, that I could be left to wither away in that motel room. They were wrong. I would send them a letter. It wasn't a confrontation. It wasn't a threat. It was simply an invitation to meet with me to talk about the future. What they didn't know was that I had nothing to lose anymore. I had everything to gain. And I wanted them to feel the tremors of that shift. I sat down at the old writing desk in the corner of my room. The wood was scratched and worn from years of use, but I had always found comfort in it. It was where I had written letters to friends, family, and neighbors over the years. Now, it was where I would write letters to my children, the ones who had left me behind. The ones who thought I had no place in their world anymore. I took a deep breath, steadying my hand as I began to write. Letter to Adam and Natalie. Dear Adam and Natalie, I hope this letter finds you both well. As you know, life continues on and we all move forward in our own ways. I have had some new ideas and opportunities come my way, and I believe you both may be interested in hearing about what has happened with my property. I plan to take some important steps in the coming weeks, and if you would like, I would be happy to share some details with you. Perhaps I could invite you over for a brief meeting to discuss the future and how we might continue to collaborate under these new circumstances. I look forward to hearing from you. Warm regards, Evelyn. I sealed the letter in an envelope, my hand steady as I wrote their names on the front. For a moment, I just held it in my hands, feeling the weight of it. This wasn't just a letter. It was a statement a declaration that I was still here, still moving, still making decisions. It was my first move in taking back what was rightfully mine. My life, my dignity, my future. I slipped the letters into the mailbox with a sense of finality, the cool air of the evening brushing against my face. There was something deeply satisfying in this quiet, calculated gesture. I didn't need to shout to be heard. I didn't need to scream or beg for their attention. I would make them come to me. They had left me alone in that motel room, but I was going to build something that would make them realize they had underestimated me. As I walked back to my new home, I felt a sense of calm. This was only the beginning. This wasn't about money or revenge. It was about power. The power of knowing that I was still alive, still capable of changing my fate. I could already imagine their reaction when they received the letters. Adam, likely confused at first, but then slowly realizing that this wasn't a simple invitation. It was a reminder. A reminder that I wasn't the woman they could push aside. Natalie, always calculating, would probably feel the first hints of fear. They had no idea what was coming, but they would soon. The world was shifting slowly but surely, and it was shifting in my direction. Every step I took, every decision I made was a small victory. A victory that would eventually turn into something much bigger. They had left me to wither, but I was going to bloom, and when they saw me again they would understand. This was just the first move. And as I stood there, watching the evening sky stretch out before me, I knew. The best was yet to come. ChatGPT. The air in my new home felt calm, peaceful. I had worked hard to make it my sanctuary. And now, as I sat at my small kitchen table, sipping tea, I realized something. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. The quiet comfort of this space, the knowledge that I had built it on my own terms, made me feel invincible. The letter I had sent was my first calculated move, and now I was watching, patiently, as my family began to understand that I was no longer the same woman they had left behind. The silence had stretched on, thick and undeniable. The ball was in their court now. They had no idea what I had become. I heard the doorbell ring, and my heart fluttered just the slightest. I knew who it was. The sound of the door opening confirmed it. Adam and Natalie had arrived. I didn't rush to greet them. I didn't need to. Let them come to me, let them feel the weight of the situation, the tension between us. They had thought I would wait, helpless and alone. But they were wrong. I sat in the dining room, the soft light from the windows bathing the space in quiet warmth. Adam and Natalie entered, their faces showing hesitation and concern. I could see it in their eyes. The unease, the realization that they were no longer in control of this situation. They were the ones who had been abandoned, not me. "Mom," Adam said, his voice cracking with emotion. We made a huge mistake." He stepped forward, his shoulders slumped with guilt. We're sorry. We didn't realize how much you meant to us. All we wanted was to fix things. To make it right." Natalie stood behind him, her eyes glistening with tears. We didn't understand. We were wrong, and we want to make amends." I stayed silent, not out of anger, but because I wanted them to feel the weight of what had been done. I didn't need to speak first. They had to understand that this moment wasn't for them. It was for me. I looked at them both, my heart as steady as the tea in my cup. "You know what the worst part is," I finally said, my voice calm but firm. "You thought you could just forget about me. Leave me alone in that motel. You had no idea what I was capable of. And now you want to make it right." Adam's face flushed, and Natalie wiped her tears, but they both stood there, waiting. I could feel their desperate hope that somehow I would say the words they needed to hear, words that would absolve them of their guilt. I shook my head slightly. "I've changed. You've already made your choice. You abandoned me, and now you want me to take you back into my life as if nothing happened." I stood up slowly, walking to my desk, where I had placed the letter I had written after discovering my newfound strength, the letter that had marked the end of my dependence on them. I picked it up and held it out in front of them, watching their eyes as they saw the words. "I'm no longer your responsibility, and you are no longer mine. You chose this path, and now it's your decision to live with it." They looked at the letter in disbelief. The words were simple, but they were final. I didn't need their forgiveness. I didn't need their approval. I had built something for myself, and now I would walk away from the wreckage they had left behind. I met their eyes one last time. "Go. I don't need your apologies," I said quietly. There was a long silence, and then, without another word, they turned and left. I could hear the sound of their footsteps echoing down the hallway, but I didn't flinch. This was it. This was the moment when I let go. As the door closed behind them, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. This was my final step toward reclaiming my life, my dignity, and my future. They had come to ask for forgiveness, but what they didn't understand was that they had already lost what they needed most: my trust. I walked over to the window and looked out at the garden I had carefully nurtured. The flowers bloomed brightly, and the trees swayed gently in the wind. This was my space, my creation. It was a reflection of who I had become: strong, independent, and unbroken. I took a deep breath, letting the peaceful air fill my lungs. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. I had found my voice, my strength, and I had learned that I didn't need anyone to define me. I was whole just as I was. This was my life now, and no one would take it from me. ChatGPT.